Welcome again to MBA 5005, Managing Human Capital. We are now going to discuss Module F, which is Organizational Sustainability through Culture and Ethics. Let's go through the objectives of this module. We need to have a look at the development of workplace health and safety in the Australian industry, have a look at workplace health and safety theory and practice and policies with respect to employees, organizations, and trade unions, understand the development and evolution of WHS legislation, federal and state, describe the scope of WHS programs, understand what role senior managers, employees, and human resource play in the implementation of WHS policies and procedures. It is very important to have a safe environment, so it is important to have a WHS implemented at the organization because it is a more cost-effective tool to minimize inefficiencies or delays in implementing projects. Workplace accidents and incidences, if reduced, will improve the organizational efficiency and minimize delays in achieving the objectives. Every day or so you will read in the news some unethical decision making done by certain companies. For example, Lehman Brothers, the spill in the Gulf of Mexico as a result of negligence, violation of codes of conduct, unethical sort of briberies. All of these have put pressure on implementing ethical practices and workplace health systems in the organization. We used to be focusing on one bottom line, which is making money. However, at the moment there is a triple bottom line theory which includes environmental and social responsibility. So therefore it is the objective of organizations to look after all its stakeholders, internal and external, and that would be the objective of our understanding. The main objective of ethical human resource management is the way workers are managed to achieve the objectives. So the end justifies the means is not an actual proper policy for us to be implementing in the workplace. Have a look at this table to give you an additional understanding of certain social issues and how HR responds to these issues. So after we've determined in the previous modules certain human resource management plans, comes the implementation of an appropriate workplace or WHS policy within the workplace. The following is a model for such implementation. Let's look at some secondary data to understand what really is the issue and how important it is to have a look at a proper WHS policy. Between 2009 and 2010, if we look at a snapshot of that year, there has been about 337 deaths in the workplace, which is about a fatality rate of 1.9 out of 100,000 workers. It's still a significant issue that needs to be looked after. And these are only the reported incidences. In some countries, this is not reported. Between 2006 and 2007, almost 150,000 workplace injuries have been reported, and as a result, corresponding compensation claims. This is by itself an alarming statistic because it leads to more direct and indirect costs to the organization. Direct would be the subsequent loss of resources and compensation costs, and indirect related to employee morale and run-on effect on not having a safe environment to work in. Potential hazards. A hazard is by definition, what that can cause injury. So a likelihood of an injury happens as a result of an incident. Some of them related to the physical setting of an unsafe environment to work in. Hazardous materials or unsafe sort of chemicals available spill in terms of different employee environments. Stress is becoming a very important aspect of the workplace and it needs a lot of attention from human resource managers. Violence or harm to employees is also an important aspect to look at. For example, there were a lot of court cases. One of them is related to an employee who was asked to work a night shift and as a health worker, and on the way back he stopped at a KFC to have dinner. He was robbed and mugged and injured. He submitted a compensation claim and was awarded that claim as part of his work, even though his shift ended, because of unsafe work practices of asking the employee to work at a late hour, which is part of their work. So it's a contentious issue for organizations, but it has become very important to look at. So there is a need, as we said, for human resources to develop intervention strategies to be able to prevent a hazard from happening and to reduce the likely impact of it. So it's not just about treating the problem, that means become reactive to it, but look at the root causes of the problem so that we can prevent it from happening, or at least minimize the impact of a serious injury if it happens. So develop preventative measures and rehabilitation programs to deal with injuries in the workplace. Let's look at the different perspective of WHS in Australia. We've come up to this stage at this point in time through reform and social movement that shaped the development and improvement of WHS. Let's look at this one by one. Initially, there was a medical model for WHS. More emphasis was in this medical model about the diagnostics and treatment rather than the prevention of a hazard or a unsafe environment. This model is very narrowly focused because it deals with a reactive approach. It doesn't determine the root cause of the problem or even develop preventative measure. Other professional interests related to epidemic perspective, which is the understanding of widespread diseases or incidences and try and minimize or prevent them from happening. Other disciplines or perspective that led to shaping the discipline of WHS is psychological measures, specifically industrial psychology, which tries to understand the behavior or psychology of workers within their environment or within their workplace. Another perspective to understand WHS is through the sociological perspective, which is mainly related to understanding the interpersonal communications and behavior within the workplace. This looks at four-level causative model of diseases or injuries, reward systems, command structure, work organization, and individual factors. Another dimension or perspective is the ergonometric setup or configuration of the workplace, which tries to improve productivity by eliminating or reconfiguring the physical arrangement of the workplace. For example, distance to the desk, distance to the screen, type of chair. So there are certain programs installed in computers to allow the employee or ask the employee to maybe do some exercises every 30 minutes, mandatory lunch breaks. All of these systems are to develop such sort of perspective to minimize the risk of injury. And this draws on scientific management theories. The other perspective is related to the legal legislation. However, the number of legal cases have increased as a result of more emphasis on WHS regulations and safety within the workplace. Union approaches is another perspective. As we discussed in previous module, there is a move towards a more harmonized relationship rather than adversary relationship between government employees and their representatives. So to come up with an alternative to minimize incidences and even reduce the inefficiencies in the workplace. So WHS becomes an important function within the human resource management perspective because this requires consultation and input from all stakeholders internally and externally within the workplace. There are issues that need to be included at the strategic level and at the operational level, including legislation and work practices, as well as setting up committees to support such legislation and practices implemented. We've looked at these different acts and evolution of such acts in previous module and at the state, federal and workplace level that it's worthwhile reviewing for this section. Let's have a look at the WHS legislation related to rehabilitation issues. Let's look at workers' compensation and rehabilitation specifically. Rehabilitation cannot be designed in isolation of practices. It needs to be industry-based, functional, and it should also be based on early intervention and multidisciplinary, also based on shared responsibility. It is the responsibility of all stakeholders in the organization, internal as well as external, to make sure there is a safe workplace environment for employees, coordinated by human resource management and incorporated into the plan and the strategies of the organization. Let's try and discuss most important issues that need to pay attention to. One of them is accidents at work. There is a need to be able to assess with certain certainty, or at least closer to certainty, the number of accidents, the reasons for those accidents in the workplace within the industry. We need to identify causes and try and prevent them from happening. However, we need to also develop a framework, which means not just treat each incident on its own, but be a part of an overall incident and prevention policy. I think we lead a stressful life, balance of work and family, balance of work and life, amount of information that we receive. All of these increases the organizational stress that we as employees are facing, with shortened deadlines, changes in structures, continuous uncertainty, lack of job security. All of these are leading to increased occupational stress. There's no agreed definition of what occupational stress is. However, you can see symptoms within an employee's fatigue levels, exhaustion, physical or emotional sort of projections down in terms of approach and body language. All of these are symptoms that managers or co-workers need to be able to assess. Now, this diagram shows you that there is an ideal level of stress after which it becomes a little bit dangerous to have, and that would be something that we need to work with. Yeah, so under stress can lead to lack of challenging job and can also lead to lack of productivity. Overstress is quite the opposite, whereby it affects the employee's willingness and ability to perform the duties. However, there is an optimal level of stress, which is EU stress, and this one accompanies your accomplishments and achievement. For example, the more difficult the task is, can get positive stress, but then when you achieve the task, it gives you a lot of satisfaction as compared to an easier type of work that you can easily be completing. So there is an optimal level organizations try to achieve. Have a look at this diagram, which explains to you types of stress and policies with respect to how do we deal with them in an organizational setting. Now, how do we respond to stress? So employer responses, there are 5 steps. Develop a preventative strategy. In order for us to identify and prevent stress, we have to have a proper identification system. Top management need to be involved to give you support. We need to evaluate existing programs and document everything in a continuous approach. It's not done at a point in time, it's always to be reviewed and implemented. Now, in its own, international travel, even if you go on a holiday, is always comes with it some risks. So with the multinational corporations and different organizations having work or clients in different countries, there is more emphasis on international travel. This in itself brings in a lot of sort of hazards to the employee. And this can be related to diseases, incidents, terrorist actions, problems. You know, all of these factors need to be taken into account within international travel as a stressor. Now, we all know the term bullying, and we think of it as bullying in schools at a certain level or education level or age groups. However, there has been an increased incidences of workplace bullying, whereby less favorable or at an entry level or at a different level is being coerced or forced to do things that they either in contradiction with values and belief systems or in terms of discrimination and maybe harassment as such. So therefore it is becoming an increasing area of concern. Because companies are dealing with international time zones and they are selling or buying or supporting sort of businesses outside in different regions, there is more usage of shift work. Now, shift work in its own, workers working at nights, maybe relaxing or sleeping during the day, is really stressful in itself, because it changes the way that we as individuals behave in terms of when do we relax and when do we sleep and when do we wake up. Regardless if you have enough rest during the day, it's still, your system is not built for that, and that puts pressure on mental abilities and stressful sort of behavior, regardless how many hours you slept. Scientific management or previous theories of management discuss that there is a separation between life outside and life inside, and employees are resources. However, this has changed, and there is a need for organizations to satisfy individual needs and to create a balanced life and work at the same time. So dealing with personal problems or employees' issues in the workplace, managers need to have enough training to be able to do that. It's part of their empathy towards employees' issues. So helping employees through on-site programs and external consulting services as well. It adds value to employees' appreciation and commitment to the workplace. One of these programs called Wellness Program, and this one assesses overall employee lifestyle in an attempt to improve their overall happiness levels or commitment levels, or balancing their lifestyle outside the work to have a positive impact on their abilities inside the work. To effectively manage WHS programs, we need to have top management commitment, protective and medical first aid facilities, integrated promotion, risk management practices, consultative measures in an integrated approach. All of these requirements that we have put in on WHS programs require a supporting mechanism, and that would be information systems. Because we have a large amounts of data, we need a system that can collect these data accurately, analyze the data, and produce certain reports for us to be managing or reflecting on. Accident cost management is important. Control of reimbursements. Details need to be clear of what the objectives are of rehabilitation programs and how they have been implemented, and need to be interfacing with other processes through a unified system. There are a lot of sources for information and assistance. For example, Safe Work Australia, Australian Safety and Compensation Council, Comcare, WorkCover in New South Wales, and WorkCare in Victoria, and similar ones in different states, State Rehabilitation and Labour Councils, and workplace health centres in most states. Let's summarize the key points that we've discussed so far. Workplace health and safety is really the largest growing aspect of human resource management. More than one interest group is involved in this, because it impacts a variety of internal and external stakeholders. Australia has a comprehensive legislation related to WHS, and it is very high in implementation of these practices. There is really an important shift from having reactive programs to more into a prevention or preventative programs based on consultation to identify root causes of problems, to eliminate the likelihood of impact and the seriousness if it happens. There are a lot of issues, diverse issues, that are recently in practice. For example, the things about workplace bullying, about traveling, about shift work. All of this puts pressure on modifying and always enhancing existing practices. All of this require WHS to be integrated within the human resource function. This brings us to the end of Module F. Thank you for listening. If you have any additional queries, please have a look at the text or send us an email. I look forward to seeing you in the next module. Module G would be the last module for this subject. Thank you very much.